the morning was a typical one for Jack, a lone sailor with weathered hands and a face etched by salt and sun. His small but sturdy fishing boat, the Mariner's Whisper, cut through the calm sea, leaving a frothy trail in its wake. The familiar cries of seagulls and the rhythmic lapping of waves against the hull were comforting constants in Jack's solitary world. He inhaled deeply, the salty air filling his lungs as he set about preparing his fishing gear with practiced ease. But as the sun climbed higher, something peculiar unfolded. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly, a slight dimming of the usual symphony of the sea. Jack paused, frowning, a hooked line dangling loosely in his grip. The seagull's cries seemed to fade into a distant echo, and the sound of the waves grew oddly muffled, as if he had suddenly plunged underwater. A disquieting stillness enveloped the Mariner's Whisper. Jack's frown deepened. He strained his ears, searching for the comforting sound of the sea, but it was as though the ocean had muted itself. In its place, a strange white noise began to swell. It was a hollow, static sound like the buzzing of a detonated radio, filling the air with an invisible, pressing weight. Jack's heart began to pound in his chest, a primal response to this uncanny silence. He glanced around, half expecting to see a logical source for this eerie change. But there was nothing, only the endless expanse of the sea, calm and unbroken, stretching to the horizon under a cloudless sky. The white noise grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to vibrate in Jack's skull, setting his teeth on edge. He dropped his fishing gear, his hands now gripping the sides of the boat. His eyes darted across the water, searching for any sign of normalcy. But the ocean offered no answers. Then a whisper, so faint at first. Jack thought he had imagined it, but as he stood there alone on his silent vessel, the whisper grew clearer. It was an unintelligible murmur, a soft, sibilant sound that seemed to slither through the air. Jack's skin prickled with goosebumps. It was as if the whisper emanated from the sea itself, a ghostly voice rising from the depths. Panic, a feeling unfamiliar to the seasoned sailor, began to claw its way up Jack's throat. He looked to the sky, hoping for a sign, a bird, a passing plane, anything. But there was only the oppressive, empty blue staring back at him. Jack reached instinctively for the radio, his last link to the world beyond this unnerving void. He fumbled with the dials, his fingers trembling. Static crackled through the speaker, a harsh, grating sound that overlaid the eerie white noise and the soft, unceasing whispers. "Mayday, mayday," Jack tried to call out, but his voice seemed to be swallowed by the thick air, as if the atmosphere itself had turned viscous and heavy. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, though still Jack could not discern any words. It was as though 1,000 muted voices were speaking all at once, their words overlapping and intertwining into an incomprehensible cacophony. Jack's gaze swept across the water once more, desperate for any sign of life, any hint of movement. But there was nothing, just the sea, the sky, and the unnerving, omnipresent white noise. With a surge of irrational fear, Jack made a decision. He rushed to the wheel, his hands shaking as they grasped the cool metal. It was time to go back, to flee this unsettling silence, to return to the familiarity of land and noise. But as he turned, the Mariner's Whisper around, heading back towards the shore he had left behind. The whispering voices followed, a haunting chorus, in the midst of the overwhelming, unnatural quiet. Jack's hands gripped the wheel of the Mariner's Whisper with a fervor born of fear as he steered her back towards the shore. The sun, once a warm, comforting presence, now seemed to glare down at him with an unforgiving, almost hostile intensity. The sea around him stretched endlessly, a vast, undulating mirror that reflected the sky's merciless gaze. The white noise persisted, an incessant hum that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his racing heart. But it was no longer alone. The whispers had grown in strength and clarity, forming a chilling, repetitive phrase that slithered into his ears. The boat's crew is asking for help. The words, distorted and ethereal, seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere, resonating from the very air and water around him. Jack's eyes darted to the empty deck, half expecting to see a ghostly crew materialize before him. But there was only the stark, unforgiving emptiness of his boat. The very idea of a crew on his solitary vessel was absurd. Yet the whispers were relentless, repeating their eerie plea over and over. Time became a muddled, elusive concept as Jack sailed on. The shore should have been within sight by now, but the horizon remained unbroken, a cruel, taunting line that seemed to retreat further with every passing moment. The sun moved across the sky, casting long, sinister shadows across the deck, but the coastline he knew so well was nowhere to be seen. Panic began to twist inside him, a gnawing, insidious creature that clawed at his mind. Doubt crept in, whispering treacherous thoughts. Had he lost his way? Was this some cruel trick of nature, a disorienting mirage on the open sea? But no, his compass steadfastly pointed towards home, a silent, unerring sentinel amidst the madness. Jack's navigational skills were honed by years at sea, and yet, as he followed the compass's unwavering directive, the shore remained a distant, unattainable dream. The white noise and whispers grew louder, as if feeding off his growing despair. The words, though clear, made no sense. The boat's crew is asking for help. The phrase echoed in his head, a mantra of madness that seemed to mock his helplessness. Jack's gaze returned obsessively to the compass, and then to the horizon, the 2 points of reality he clung to in the midst of this nightmare. His hands ached from gripping the wheel, his knuckles white and strained, but he dared not loosen his hold. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting an eerie, blood-red glow across the waters, a deep, unsettling cold settled over the boat. The temperature drop was abrupt, unnatural, and Jack shivered despite himself. His breath came out in visible puffs, fogging in the suddenly frigid air. The whispers seemed to revel in the cold, growing more frenzied, more insistent. Jack's mind raced, desperate for an explanation, a solution, any form of escape from this relentless, unexplainable pursuit. He scanned the waters, searching for a sign, a landmark, anything that could guide him back to reality. But there was only the sea, the sky, and the unyielding line of the horizon, a trifecta of terror that held him captive in this watery purgatory. And as night began to fall, bringing with it a darkness that seemed to swallow the light, Jack realized with a sinking heart that he was truly lost, adrift in a sea of whispers and white noise with no end in sight. The night enveloped the mariner's whisper. In an oppressive blanket of darkness, the stars obscured by a thick, suffocating veil of clouds. The once familiar sea had transformed into a black abyss, reflecting none of the moon's pale light. The chilling whispers continued, their ceaseless chant. The boat's crew is asking for help, now a sinister lullaby in the unyielding night. Jack's mind teetered on the brink of madness, his thoughts a whirlpool of fear and confusion. He fumbled towards the radio, his last beacon of hope in this nightmare. The radio's static crackled like a wild, untamed animal, an angry hiss that seemed to mock his desperation. He adjusted the dials with trembling fingers, his voice a ragged whisper as he called for help. But the static swallowed his pleas, leaving him with a sinking feeling of utter isolation. Suddenly, the boat lurched violently, throwing Jack against the wheel. A monstrous wave, rising like a behemoth from the depths, loomed over him. Its crest frothed menacingly against the night sky. a wall of impending doom. Jack clung to the wheel, his knuckles white, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm of terror. The wave crashed down with a fury, a cataclysmic force that threatened to send the mariner's whisper and its lone occupant to the ocean's depths. Water engulfed the deck, a cold, merciless deluge that fought to drag Jack into the sea abyss. But as quickly as it had reason, the wave resetted, leaving behind a stunned and soaking Jack, gasping for breath in the eerie calm. The silence that followed was almost more terrifying than the wave itself. The sea lay still as if holding its breath, and the whispers ceased, leaving a void that was thick and palpable. Jack's heart raced, his mind reeling from the brush with death. He knew the ocean. He had respected its power and unpredictability. But this was beyond nature, beyond understanding. He dropped to his knees, the wet deck cold and unforgiving beneath him. His prayers were desperate, a plea to any deity that might be listening for salvation, for an end to this torment. But his words felt hollow, absorbed by the thick air around him. And then the whispers returned, clearer now, more defined. A cold, mocking voice that resonated with an unnatural clarity. Prayers won't help you. The words slithered around him, a serpentine embrace that chilled him to his core. Jack's eyes widened in horror, the realization that whatever haunted him was aware, sentient, and listening filled him with a dread so deep it was paralyzing. He looked around wildly, half expecting to see a figure, a shadow, anything that could give form to the voice. But there was nothing, only the endless expanse of the dark sea and the oppressive night sky. His mind raced, thoughts jumbled and frantic. Was he going mad? Was this some hellish dream from which he would eventually wake? The boat creaked ominously beneath him, a stark reminder of his grim reality. Jack staggered to his feet, a man driven by primal survival instinct. He knew he had to keep moving, to keep trying. Despite the futility of his efforts, he returned to the wheel, his hands shaking as he took hold, steering blindly into the night. The whispers, his malevolent companion in the vast, unending darkness. In the heart of that endless night, as Jack battled both his inner demons and the relentless sea, a sinister transformation began to unfold. The horizon, once a mocking, distant line, now started to blur and shift, warping under the weight of a strange, otherworldly glow. It was as if reality itself was bending, contorting into a nightmare. Jack's weary eyes, red and strained from salt and sleeplessness, widened in disbelief. There, on the distorted horizon, emerged a shore. But it was unlike any he had ever seen or imagined. This was no haven, no sanctuary of land and life. It was an infernal vision, a hellscape that defied the laws of nature and sanity. The sky above this cursed shoreline bled in hues of crimson and orange, painting a picture of a world engulfed in flames. The sea seemed to boil as it neared the shore, steam rising in ghostly tendrils. Jack's mouth went dry, his throat constricting in terror. The whispers grew into a chorus of screams and cries, a cacophony of despair that mirrored the fiery apocalypse before him. On the burning shore, silhouettes of people, or what once were people, writhed in the fiery glow. They were engulfed in flames, their bodies ablaze, yet they moved with a ghastly purpose. Some ran towards the sea, their screams piercing the night as they sought relief from their unending torment in the boiling waters. Jack felt a scream building in his own chest, a primal urge to release the terror that clawed at his sanity. He opened his mouth to cry out, but no sound came. His voice, once his only solace in the solitude of the sea, had been stolen, leaving him in a silent world of horror. The boat, as if drawn by some malevolent force, edged closer to the shore of nightmares. Jack's hands flew to the controls, desperately trying to reverse course, to flee from this vision of hell. But the mariner's whisper seemed to have a will of its own, steadily advancing towards the fiery abyss. His eyes transfixed on the shore, Jack witnessed scenes that would haunt him for whatever remained of his life. People, their bodies charred and blackened, plunged into the sea only to emerge still ablaze, their agony unquenched. Others wandered the beach aimlessly, their cries joining the hellish chorus that filled the air. The heat from the shore was palpable now, a searing wave that washed over him, suffocating and intense. Jack's skin prickled with the heat, his hair singed by the closeness of the flames. The boat creaked and groaned under the stress, the smell of burning wood and paint filling the air. Jack, paralyzed by fear, could only watch as the boat drew nearer to the shore. His mind, pushed to the brink, struggled to process the surreal, nightmarish tableau unfolding before him. The very concept of reality had shattered, leaving him adrift in a sea of madness and horror. And as the boat neared the burning shoreline, the cries of the damned rising to a deafening crescendo, Jack's terror reached a new, unimaginable height. This was no longer a fight for survival against the sea. It was a descent into the very depths of hell itself. The world around Jack had descended into chaos. The ghastly shoreline of fire and torment loomed closer, its heat scorching, its light blinding. Above, the sky roared with an anger that seemed to shake the very foundations of heaven and earth. The sea, once a trusted ally, now betrayed him, its waters churning and boiling as if in agony, conspiring to deliver him into this unspeakable hellscape. As the mariner's whisper drew inexorably nearer to the inferno, the air grew thick with the stench of burning flesh and wood. The cries of the damned souls on the shore melded with the whispers, creating a symphony of despair that echoed in the hollows of Jack's mind. He felt the intense heat searing his skin, the radiant energy pulsating from the shore like the breath of a monstrous beast. Suddenly, a colossal wave, far greater than any he had ever seen, rose from the depths. Its crest was a towering wall of water, frothing with rage, glowing eerily in the light of the burning shore. Time seemed to slow as the wave approached, a looming harbinger of doom that threatened to engulf everything in its path. Jack, frozen in terror, could only watch as the wave crashed down upon the mariner's whisper. The boat was tossed like a toy, lifted on the crest of the monstrous wave. For a moment it seemed as though they would be hurled directly into the heart of the inferno on the shore. Jack was thrown to the deck, his body slamming against the hard wood with brutal force, his vision blurred, pain exploding in his head, a stark white-hot agony that pierced the terror. Water flooded the deck, a swirling, boiling maelstrom that threatened to sweep him away. Jack clung desperately to the railing, his fingers slipping on the slick, wet surface. The boat pitched violently, tossed about by the relentless power of the wave. The roar of the water was deafening, drowning out the screams from the shore, the whispers in his head, even the pounding of his own heart. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the wave dissipated, leaving the mariner's whisper to crash down onto the turbulent sea. The impact was jarring, a brutal return to the unforgiving reality of the ocean. Water cascaded off the deck, flowing back into the sea, leaving Jack drenched, battered, but miraculously alive. He struggled to his feet, every movement agony, his head spinning, his vision still clouded. Through the haze of pain, he saw that the boat had been carried closer to the shore during the tumultuous ascent. The scenes of horror were now vividly clear, no longer distant shadows. The burning figures on the shore seemed to reach out to him, their faces twisted in eternal torment, their eyes hollow pits of despair. And then, another wave, smaller but no less fierce, struck the boat. Jack was unprepared, his weakened body unable to withstand the force. He was thrown against the side of the boat, his head striking the edge with a sickening crack. The world spun, a maelstrom of light and sound, pain and fear, swirling around him as he slipped into darkness. The last thing Jack saw before succumbing to unconsciousness was the burning shore, now alarmingly close, its fiery maw ready to consume him, to claim him as one of its own. And then, nothing but darkness, a void where even the whispers could not reach. Consciousness returned to Jack in fragments, a slow, agonizing resurgence from the depths of oblivion. His eyes flickered open, revealing a world blurred and spinning. The ground beneath him was hard and unyielding, a stark contrast to the rocking deck of the mariner's whisper. The air was thick with the smell of salt and charred wood, a pungent reminder of the horrors he had witnessed. As his vision cleared, and his mind wrestled with the fog of unconsciousness, Jack realized he was no longer aboard his vessel. He lay on the hellish shore he had so desperately sought to escape, the burning sands scorching his skin, the fiery glow bathing him in a sinister light. The boat was drifting away, slowly being swallowed by the sea, leaving him stranded in this nightmarish realm. The screams and wails that had filled the air were gone, replaced by a haunting silence that was somehow more terrifying. The figures that had been ablaze were now mere charred husks, scattered across the beach like grotesque statues, frozen in their final moments of agony. Jack attempted to rise, his body protesting with sharp, searing pain. Every movement was an ordeal, a battle against the screaming protests of his battered frame. He surveyed his surroundings, the desolation and ruin stretching as far as the eye could see, a landscape of despair and destruction. The radio from his boat crackled to life, a static-filled voice cutting through the silence. Jack's blood ran cold as he recognized the voice. It was his own repeating the distress call he had made hours, or perhaps days, earlier. The words "the boat's crew is asking for help" looped in a chilling echo, a ghostly reminder of his plight. Then, amidst the crackling of the radio, another sound emerged. The whispers. They were different now, no longer a chorus of indistinct voices, but a single, clear voice, cold and unfeeling. "That's what you did on this shore," it hissed, a statement that filled Jack with a sense of dread he couldn't comprehend. Jack's mind raced, confusion and fear intertwining in a chaotic dance. "But I didn't do anything. What's going on?" he shouted, his voice raspy and weak. The whisper responded with a chilling simplicity. "Ask your ancestors." The word struck Jack like a physical blow, a suggestion of inherited guilt, a legacy of sins passed down through generations. He looked around at the desolate shore, the burnt figures, the sea that had turned against him, and felt the weight of a history he had never known, a past shrouded in darkness and mystery. A sense of hopelessness enveloped him, thick and suffocating. He was alone, utterly and completely, in a place that defied reality, haunted by the sins of his forebears. The whispers had ceased, leaving him in a silence that was heavy with implication, with the echoes of a past he had never questioned until now. With a deep, trembling breath, Jack pushed himself to his feet. The pain was a constant companion, but he forced himself to move, to walk away from the shore, away from the haunting remnants of the infernal beach. He stumbled toward the tree line, the dark silhouette of the forest, promising refuge from the exposed, open hell of the beach. But as he moved, a dreadful realization dawned on him. No matter how far he walked, the forest seemed to remain just out of reach, an ever-receding mirage that taunted his efforts. He looked back, and the shore was still there, the burning sands, the charred remains, his drifting boat a fading speck on the horizon. Despair gripped Jack's heart, a cold, unrelenting hand that squeezed the last vestiges of hope from his soul. He was trapped, caught in a cycle of horror and retribution, a pawn in a game played by unseen forces, a game that spanned generations and defied the bounds of time and reality. As the night deepened, enveloping the world in its dark embrace, Jack understood that he was not just lost at sea, but lost in the echoes of a past that had finally come to claim him. In the suffocating darkness of the night, Jack's desperation morphed into a frenzied determination. The forest, a mere silhouette against the starless sky, seemed to mock him with its unattainable promise of escape. Each step he took was a battle against the sinking sands, against the overwhelming despair that clung to him like a second skin. The whispers had ceased, but their absence did nothing to alleviate the heavy air of foreboding that enveloped the beach. The charred figures, grotesque monuments to pain and suffering, seemed to watch him, their hollow eyes following his every move. Jack's mind was a whirlwind of terror and confusion. The voice's command to "ask your ancestors" replayed in his head, a taunting riddle that gnawed at his sanity. He had no answers, only a lineage he knew nothing of, a heritage shrouded in mystery and now apparently darkness. The forest seemed to move with him, always just out of reach, an elusive haven that danced away each time he thought he was close. It was a cruel trick of this cursed place, a loop of torment and hopelessness. His legs ached, his lungs burned, but he pushed on, driven by a primal need to escape, to break free from the nightmare. But escape was a dream, a fleeting, unattainable fantasy. Each time he looked back, the shore was there, as if he had never moved, the waves gently lapping at the sands, indifferent to his plight. The boat, the mariner's whisper, was now nothing more than a speck in the distance, a part of a past that was forever out of reach. The night wore on, an endless expanse of time that stretched and twisted, warping Jack's perception of reality. He was no longer sure if he had been walking for hours or days. His body was on the brink of collapse, his mind teetering on the edge of madness. As the first light of dawn began to pierce the darkness, casting a pale, eerie glow over the beach, Jack's feet stumbled to a halt. He was back where he had started, the charred figures, the burning sands, the relentless sea, all unchanged, all waiting for him. The truth crashed down on him with the force of a tidal wave. He was trapped in an endless cycle, a loop of horror that he could not break. His lineage, his unknown ancestry, had somehow condemned him to this fate, a perpetual punishment for sins he had not committed, a debt he could not repay. Exhaustion overtook him and he collapsed onto the burning sands, the heat searing his skin, the cries of the damned echoing in the recesses of his mind. He lay there, his eyes staring blankly at the sky, which began to lighten with the promise of a new day, a day that brought no hope, no respite, only the continuation of his endless torment. The whispers returned, a soft, insidious murmur that caressed his ears. "This is your legacy," they cooed, a chilling lullaby that lulled him into a fitful, restless sleep. In his dreams, he saw flashes of the past, of faces and fires, of screams and silence, a tapestry of horror woven by the hands of his ancestors. And when he awoke, the cycle would begin anew. The beach, the forest, the whispers, a never-ending spiral of despair and madness. Jack was lost, not just in body but in soul, a prisoner of the past, condemned to wander the shores of his own personal hell for eternity.